sun, how are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning. Good, good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good morning, sun.
And hello, greetings. No coffee right now, but some lunchtime water. Okay, so today I thought I'd talk about a Business Central feature that I think it's fairly interesting, and it could just be interesting because I'm not used to having the feature coming from the Dynamics GP world. We didn't really have this, and the feature is archive documents. That's kind of the general name, document archiving. And I was aware of this, but I recently learned more about it, and it produces some interesting possibilities. So, anyway, thought I'd talk about it and dig in a little bit and learn more. So, with that, thanks to Jeremy Viska for explaining a little more about this feature. I was kind of aware of it in just one aspect of it, which I'll talk about, but Jeremy showed me there are a couple other dimensions to this which make it more of an interesting feature and really change the use cases where this could potentially be used and how it might be used. So it's kind of understated in the Business Central documents. It's just under the heading Archive Documents. It's one page, relatively simple, doesn't seem to really explore the different capabilities of the entire feature, I don't think, unless it's under a different heading or different docs. But this one docs page, you could read it and think, oh, okay, no big deal, and really move on, which is, I think, what I did originally. And the reason I say that is because, as far as I could tell, this is really kind of like three different features under the heading of one, under archive documents. But as far as I could tell, there's one version of this feature, one use of it, and that's archive documents on demand. That's a pretty specific step, distinct from the others. So you can have a document open in Business Central and you can archive it. Boom, it's archived. Next, related to that archive demand, is document versioning. Not only can you archive the document at this point in time, you can have multiple archives of that document, which produces or allows you to archive multiple versions of that document. And once you have one or more versions of a document archived, you can restore one of those versions. So you can restore back to a prior version of that document. And I think that's pretty powerful. I mean, it's not a trivial feature to implement. So it seems like a fair amount of work at least went into this feature. So it makes me curious about why, which I'll talk about at the end. And then there's the third variant of this feature is automatic document archiving on deletion. And this is I think, a distinctly different feature. I mean, really, archiving on demand, document versioning, and then archiving on deletion, like, wow, this is a pretty interesting set of features related to archiving and just kind of tucked under document archiving as the title. So let's dig more into each of these. So archive document on demand, and this is the part that I was not aware of. I was only aware of the document archiving on deletion, and I only looked into that relative to purchase orders. So my understanding is if you have a purchase order, once it has been fully received and processed and it's all done, it automatically gets deleted, I believe. I haven't actually tried the process. I was helping my friend Tanya with this, and the purchase order just goes away. It's like, okay, my purpose in life is done. All of these line items on this purchase order are received, and I'm just going to delete myself. And coming from the GP world and kind of the accounting world, that's kind of scary. It's like, wait a minute, no, we do not want to delete anything automatically. So I was familiar with this last one, automatic document archiving on deletion. So you can enable that so it saves that purchase order as an archive instead of fully deleting it. And archiving is fine, it changes state, but we want to keep a copy. So anyway, this archive document on demand was new to me, and I think of it it's like a backup. But not only is it a backup, but you can have multiple versions of that backup. And this applies to many, but not all document types. So sales quotes, orders, blanket sales orders, and sales return orders, those are supported by the archive document and versioning features. This is not available for sales invoices, credit memos, or finance charge memos. So not quite sure what the distinction is there between those document types and why some are and some aren't. Just be aware of that. Now on the purchasing side, similar, it's available for a purchasing quote, purchase order, blanket PO, purchase return order, but not for a purchase invoice. And I was just digging through the different archives available, and it looks like it is available for timesheet and manager timesheet and workflow step instances. If those are of interest, it appears that you can archive those objects. So that's kind of interesting. And so archive document on demand, what does that look like? Well, when you're in one of those documents that does have the archive feature available, you have to click on the kind of, I forget the action bar or whatever it's called. You have to click on more options to expand it, and it'll show fewer options. That's when it's going to be available. And what you're looking for is the actions button, and then that'll expose functions. And under functions, if you dig under that menu, you will see archive document. And when you do that 1, 2, 3, 4 click process, if you click on archive document, it'll say, great, I've archived a copy of this document as of this point in time. And it creates a version in the archive, which is very fascinating. So if you go into the document archive for that document type, so in this case, sales quote archives, you'll see that sales quote 1003, I archived once, and sales quote 1004, I archived 3 times. So you see in their version number column there, version 1, 2, and 3. And so I can click on each of those versions, see the version at that point in time, and potentially restore that version into the current document. So this is a fascinating feature for me. It's like, whoa, that's not trivial. That's a pretty big feature. The developer in me is thinking, what's going on behind the scenes? How is that being managed? Is it in the same tables as the other documents, or is it in a different table, or is it just a field flag that indicates archived or not? It's a fair amount of logic, and 3 versions or multiple versions, it's keeping a copy of the header and lines in these archives, and you're able to restore them. It's like, Whoa, that's a pretty big deal. So that's the document or the archive on demand. And so let's just take a brief demo of that and just take a look and see what that's like. So here I have my, I'm using a Docker container, but if I go into my sales quotes and I want to create a new quote, I can choose a customer, and this is my archive test. And now I say, okay, great. I'm going to start out this sales quote, choose an item, choose a quantity, and, exit out. Well, if I go back in there and the customer's requesting changes, maybe I go into, and this is how it appeared when I first went in here, more options, actions, functions, archive document. So it's a few clicks down, but once you kind of get the hang of where this menu is, it's not too hard to find. So do you want to archive quote 1005? Yes. Great. It's been archived. It's that simple. But you need to remember to do this, right? So before I make changes, I went back in here and the customer's requested changes, say, I need to remember to archive it at some point. So I've archived this, and now I'm going to add another item, and great. So now I have this version, and I could say, well, let me just archive this so that I have version 2. Great. Okay. So that's pretty cool. So it's totally transparent at this point. But if I type in archives, you'll see I have a lot of stuff that I can choose from, 11 different options. So what's interesting is these archives are by document type or object type. So I have sales quote archives different from my sales order archives, which is interesting. It's not just sales archives and I choose which document in that massive list. It is by document type. I guess that's good. You have to know what the document type was that you archived or want to restore, but it's kind of good that it's segmented. And here is my sales quote 1005. So I can click back on version 1 and I see I only had one line item. If I go back and click on version 2, I see I have 2 line items. Crazy. So I can see all of the versions that I have archived. I can, take a look at that. It is in my history. Now, I can restore a given version to overwrite the document as it is. And looks like there's card dimensions, comments. I haven't really explored these related things, but it almost looks like there are some dimensions or versioning of these objects. I'd have to play around with that. But let's go in and let's say I go back to my quote and I choose the guest chair in red and I now exit quote 1005. But I say, well, quote archive, the customer has said that they want version 2. So I can go back in here and I can say restore version 2. Yes, it has been restored. So now if I go back to my quote 1005, I only have 2 line items. It's reverted the document to the prior version. Pretty crazy. I mean, super cool feature. I do have questions, but technically super cool. Like I don't believe there's anything remotely equivalent to this in Dynamics GP. So this is kind of new and it's pretty wild for me. Super powerful feature. So, I mean, if you have quote archive, if you have this part of your business practice, your business process workflow, if you have multiple quotes and maybe you have really complex quotes, what is there's a product category. It's like CPQ or quote to order. And for people who have really complex configuration management, there are dedicated, I think it's called CPQ systems. They're third-party systems. That's all they do is manage the entire sales quote to order process, which can get just unbelievably complex. I could kind of see this being kind of a lightweight version of that functionality to help you with this. And let's say that I have, 26 versions of a quote because I have 100 line items with different configuration management, different pricing, different discounts. Maybe we had to swap vendors for this particular product, or swap item numbers because this item is no longer manufactured, whatever. Interesting scenarios could come up for this, and maybe that's what you would use this for. But I restored the quote to version 2, and notice it automatically created a version 3 in the archive. Fascinating. So really cool functionality if this is something you would need. Interesting. I don't know what to say yet. So anyway, really the archive document on demand for backup purposes, and then versioning, and then you have restore. Wild, really, really wild. Then there's the other component of this, I guess the third version of this, as I would say, automatic document archiving. And this, I think, is just, it probably uses the same underlying plumbing and architecture, but this is a fundamentally different feature as far as I'm concerned. It affects a different part of the business process. So we have automatic document archiving, and this is, as far as I could tell, this is not enabled in Business Central by default at all. It seems, I haven't checked lately, but I think in both the SaaS and in the Docker containers in the Kronos company, these are all turned off by default. So if you go into sales and receivables setup or purchases and payables setup, you have to scroll down to the archiving fast tab in those sections, and you have to selectively enable the automatic document archiving by document type. So we saw that the archives are by document type. So it seems this corresponds to those different archives. So I can archive quotes automatically, and there's an option of never, prompt, or automatic. Batch archiving quotes, not sure what that is. Maybe that's when you batch delete or something like that. Archive blanket orders, archive purchase orders, or sales orders, archive return orders. And so you can selectively choose to automatically archive those documents. And then under the purchases side, it's purchase orders, purchase quotes, blanket orders, return orders, by document type. And if you hover over the text of these labels, the help says specifies if you want to archive purchase orders when they are deleted. And so the key word there is when they are deleted. It will automatically do this. So if the purchase order is completely received and that purchase order would normally be deleted, then that's when the purchase order gets archived. Now, with other document types, let's say I have a sales quote and I'm working on the sales quote and someone goes in and deletes that. This feature, archive sales quotes up above, will automatically archive the document, but there is a catch, and I think I'll show that later on. So once these documents are archived, how do you see that? How do you work with that? And I think I already showed this. You can view the archived documents by just searching for archives in the Tell Me search pane, or archive even, and you see all of these different archives available. You click on the one you want based on the document type, and you can see all the versions. Now, when you go to restore, I showed you how to restore a sales quote from one version to the older version. So you want to restore the older version of a sales quote. It'll overwrite the document. There is a catch. So when you restore the archived document, normally you would see the first one. It says, do you want to restore to version 3? And you say yes, and it'll restore. And as we saw, it apparently automatically creates a new archive with the document that was overwritten. So if I'm restoring version 3, and that's the latest version, it will automatically create a version 4 and restore version 3 back into that document. But if the archived document, in the case of, say, a sales quote, is deleted, let's say I had quote 1003 and that was archived, but then someone deleted that, I can go in the archive and I can see that version that was archived. But because the quote 1003 was deleted by someone, it does not allow me to restore the quote anymore, which is an interesting twist. I mean, in a sales quote, if it got deleted, maybe I want to restore it and bring it back. It apparently does not allow that. And I can't even bring it back as a new quote as far as I could tell. Actually, let's just check that out. So 1003 is no longer in my list. So if I want to do quote archives, like, oops, I didn't mean to delete that. This apparently does not allow restoration of that quote. So like the only options I have here really is restore. It says does not exist anymore. It is not possible to restore the quote, which is really interesting. Like I get that on a purchase order or a sales order or a transaction that may have financial consequence, but a quote, there's probably some reason off the top of my head. It's like, well, maybe that quote was not valid, and so they want to maintain the integrity of that deleted document. But maybe I would want a feature restore as new quote if it doesn't exist. So it's interesting that is not available to bring that quote back or to use this as a template to create a new quote. That's kind of, I think that's a missed opportunity. Like I could see this being something a customer might want. Maybe they had this giant quote that they used for customer A and it has an archive and they want to copy it and bring it back to life as a new quote for another customer, like a template. It appears that is not possible. So you can see it here. You can go through, look at the details and reproduce it manually. You cannot automatically restore that as a copy. So I thought that was an interesting catch there or limitation. I'm assuming there's a reason. Don't know what it would be off the top of my head. So anyway, with that catch. So I think this is a really fascinating feature, but because it's new to me, I am not yet familiar like what the use cases are for these scenarios. The automatic document archiving, that makes complete sense to me. So once this document is either manually deleted or gone through its process and is no longer an active document, and if apparently this is different than the GP world, but apparently BC will delete some transactions once they're finished. And coming from the GP world, that kind of freaks me out. So the automatic document archiving, as a GP user, I would normally enable all of that. Like I do not want to delete anything. Or if something was intentionally deleted, I'm all for keeping an archive copy of that document. And maybe storage constraints or storage concerns were part of the reason why those transactions were deleted. I don't know. But archive on demand for a document, fascinating. Like what are the use cases? How do people use this? Like a sales quote, like I said, different configurations. I could see that sales order. How are people and how are customers using this? Do you use the archive on demand? Do you use document versioning? Like what are some stories about how those are used? Do you use automatic document archiving? To me, it's a no-brainer. If you do not intentionally do not use automatic document archiving, why not? I'm kind of curious. From the Dynamics GP background in the US, like that seems like something all GP customers would want. And do you only archive some document types but not others? Like if you actually use, say, purchase quotes, do you intentionally not archive those, but you do archive purchase orders? Like what is the rationale between those? Maybe some are less consequential than others. I don't know. So anyway, I thought this was a fascinating feature, and it's just one page in the BC Docs. It's one hidden menu item just buried 4 levels deep under functions when you're in a document, or it's buried under archiving under the payables or sales setup. So I think it's a pretty significant feature, and it's kind kind of underrated based on the documentation. So anyway, if you hadn't heard of this, there you go. Give it a try, kick the tires. And if you were aware of this, I am curious, like comment below and let me know how you use it, how you don't use it, which portions of the features you use, why you selectively use some but not others. Is it storage constraints? Is it other reasons why you would not want to use this? I'm really curious. So anyway, hope that was educational, helpful, and a dose of Business Central learning for the day. Cheers.
Good